as I said, chapter 3 covers a lot of ground. And, you could probably spend a month of Sundays just looking at all this material and trying to piece together the events that were happening, because as it stands right now, we're coming close to the end of the divided kingdom. And we see a little bit about David's family at the beginning of it. We see Abner as he becomes pretty much a strong individual over the house of Saul. We see his defection to David and his intent to deliver the northern kingdoms to David and unite them with Judah. We see his murder by Joab, and then finally we see David's lamentation over this death, and his actions prove that he was not responsible or had anything to do with it, and then his condemnation for the man that really did. But in the midst of all of this, we see towards the end of chapter 3 the influence, I think, that David felt like he had over the nation when he makes the mention of the fact that the brothers what were their names? Absalom, Joab, anyway, the sons of Zeruiah were too strong for him, that he was weak. So it kind of gives me the impression at that time, in both Judah and in Israel, the military leaders, Joab and Abner, seem to have a controlling strength over the military. And of course, if the military is strong, and if you got a weak leader, they're going to look towards the military for their leadership. And David, I kind of think, felt like in his youth, now he's become king of Judah, how am I going to rule this nation? And now I've got the guy with the military over here doing things that he should not be doing. And now he's kind of weighing this, and when the final judgment is said, he puts that weight in God's hand for justice. But anyway, that's kind of getting to the end of the story. But we do see a lot of interesting things here. I think it would be amiss if we missed any of it. Incidentally, Janelle told me when she looked at the video this week that I got Abner and Joab confused towards the end of my lesson. So if I do that again, it's not intentional. It's I'll just blame it on old age. But anyway, 2 Samuel. If we were to look at this particular chapter, we see four divisions in it. We see David's sons that are born in Hebron. We see Abner's rebellion against Ishbosheth. We see Abner's murder by Joab, and then David's mourning for Abner's death. Now, the people in the context in Judah, a lot is said about David's immediate family there. He lists the name of the sons that were born in Hebron. We had Amnon, we have Chileab, Absalom, Adonijah, and Shephatiah, and Ithream, if I said those names correctly. Now, Absalom is kind of the interesting fellow. And as we go through 2 Samuel, kind of keep in your mind that David had married Maacah, which was a daughter of the king of Geshur, which was a small kingdom to the north of Israel. This was a political marriage, I kind of tend to think. And the influence, I think, that grandfather may have had upon Absalom may have led him to do the things that he did throughout his life. And he did some pretty bad things. But be that as it may, these were the sons of David that were born in Judah. We also see a mention of Zeruiah, which was David's uncle, and his three sons, Joab, which was the leader of the army, Asahel, and I got Abishai was killed by Abner. Was that correct, or was that Asahel was killed by Abner? I may have that backwards. Asahel, I got that backwards. So I got that to correct. So Asahel was killed by Abner during the war that they had back in chapter 2. Now, the people in the nation of Israel, we see is Abner, which was the commander of the Israelite army. We have Rizpah, which was Saul's concubine. Ishbosheth, which is the king of Israel. Michal, David's daughter, which was David's first wife. Daughter of Saul, which was David's first wife. And then Michal's husband, Paltiel, which is kind of an interesting individual. You remember, if you remember from 1 Samuel, David had married Michal, and then when Michal helped him to escape and kind of pulled the wool over Saul's eyes, he got mad and took her away from David and gave her to Peltiel for a wife. And this lasted until chapter 3 of 2 Samuel. And we'll kind of think about a little bit about her in just a moment. So the locations that we see in Judah, we see Hebron, then we see the well of Sirah. Now we don't really know where this is at, but they kind of think that this was a watering hole just about a mile outside of Hebron, which kind of makes sense because of the time frame that we see with Abner's murder by Joab. And then in Israel we see Bahurim, and they're not really sure where this is at. It's a place in Benjamin, and it's been also referred to as Nob. So I've been struggling with maps, and I think this one might be good to us. I know you can't read the little bitty names, so I kind of drew the arrows to it. So I'm going to point some things out to you if I can get back to it. Well, my fingers are too dry from my iPad. There we go. Geisher, which we mentioned earlier, where his wife, one of his wives was born, was up here. This is the northern kingdom. And Jezreel was the place of another wife that he had that was was married. She was from Jezreel, the northern kingdoms. We have Bahurim, which is kind of nestled between Jerusalem and a little town called Galium. And Bethlehem's kind of right down here. And then we have Hebron, which was where the well of Sarah was at, where David had his capital, I guess, for his kingdom, and also where Abner was buried. And then we have Carmel, which was, if I can get my stuff out of my way, which was where another wife that David had was from. So these are kind of the main events. Now, what I think we need to kind of look at too is right here in the middle, if this will go away, where Jerusalem is at. We see Jerusalem right here, and we see Galium right there, and we see Nob right there, which is Bahurim. Now, I wanted to point this out because when we see in chapter 3, verses 16, when 15 and 16, when Ishbosheth sent and took her away, that is Michal, away from her husband, from Peltiel, the son of Laish, then his husband went along after her to Bahurim, weeping behind her, until Abner told him, go, return, and get out of my way, get in my sight. Now, the reason I point this out is that the distance from Galium down to Jerusalem was about 4 miles. So this guy, who was from Galium, traveled down to Nob, which was about 3 miles, and that was about as far as Abner could tolerate this guy weeping behind him until he told him to get out of the way. He just, get out of my sight, go, turn around and go back. So that distance is about from here to the red light at Highway 90, and then take a dog leg to South DeWitt. That's about 3 miles. And it'd probably take you, about an hour, hour and a half to walk it. And if they were walking it, he only had about an hour that he could tolerate this guy. Now, another interesting thing about that is that Michal wasn't, we don't see anything about her other than the fact that she was going along with Abner down to Hebron. And I think that's kind of interesting because maybe in the mind of Michal, she was thinking, I'm David's first wife. David is king of Judah, and Israel's fixing to be handed to him. I'm fixing to be the queen of the nation of Israel. So she's probably had very high hopes of what she was fixing to get into, until she goes down there and sees that he's got several other wives and the families from all of these wives. And then I think she may have found herself as an outcast, and as such, or maybe someone that's an outsider, and as such, she did not have the love that she had for David beforehand. I think maybe her intent was more selfish and personal than it was for true love. But be that as it may, we'll see her deriding David later on in this book. I wanted to point that out to you because I think that may have been the mindset of this woman as she was heading down to Hebron, because not a whole lot is said other than the fact that she was going and her husband was behind her, crying, begging for her to stay, and Abner told him, shut up, I've had enough of it. So let's take a look at David's sons. We've talked about these guys before, but we need to kind of remember, because this goes through the book, and we need to understand or keep in mind these relationships that these people had. Amnon was the firstborn, and you remember he was killed by Absalom for raping his sister. Chileab, we don't know. We kind of suppose he may have died. Absalom, he sought to usurp the throne from David. He temporarily occupies the throne in Jerusalem. He defiled his father's concubines, and he was killed by Joab, his cousins. This was the guy whose mother was the daughter of the king up in Geshur. And then we have Adonijah, who sought to usurp the throne from David while he was on his deathbed, and eventually he was killed by Solomon, his brother, when he sought Solomon's inheritance of Abishag, which was considered an act of usurping the throne away from Solomon. And he was, of course, Solomon's older brother. Now, in the line of ascension, when we go through the book of Samuel, Amnon was first in line for the throne, Chileab, Absalom, and Adonijah. And we see that Absalom tries to get the throne first, and then Adonijah tries to get it. But it winds up in the hands of the younger brother. So in chapter 3, going back to our synopsis, let's take a look at it. Chapter 3 starts out with saying that there was a long war between the houses of Saul and the house of David, but David grew stronger and the house of Saul grew weaker. Now this kind of puts the two military leaders at odds with each other. Joab is seeing that he's beginning to get the upper hand. Abner begins to see, I'm not doing as well as I thought I was going to do, by trying to reassemble the army in Israel after the Philistines devastated us. And I tend to think that Ishbosheth was pretty much like a figurehead king. He's just sitting on the throne just to have someone sitting there. But Abner was doing all the hard work of trying to keep this nation together. But then we go down from verses 2 down to verse 5. We see the children that was born to David, and we just looked at those just a moment ago. And then in verse 6, he says, Now was so, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. Now, if Ishbosheth was a great king, he would not have allowed this to happen. He would have put Abner in his place, or he would have, replaced him as a military leader. Because the one thing you don't want as a king is to have someone rise up with enough power to take the throne from you. And nothing was done during this particular time. Years ago when I saw this guy that's ruling North Korea now send his father, one of the first things he did was he got rid of family members that could contest him for his rule. And he killed uncles and brothers and whoever it may be. The next thing he did was he took his generals out and killed them, and then replaced those generals with someone that were yes men to him. So he was making sure that there was nobody that was going to rise up to power to him. Ishbosheth did not do that, and he allowed his house to become weakened as Abner became stronger. And it came strong to the point that we see in verse 7 that Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Ai. So Ishbosheth, and he went in unto her. And Ishbosheth contested this. He confronted Abner. He said, why have you done this? She's my inheritance because, as part of, receiving the kingdom from Saul. And if Abner was in subjection to Ishbosheth, you would not see the confrontation that Abner gives to him. He says he becomes very angry with the words of Ishbosheth that said, am I a dog's head? In other words, that's a term of derision that belongs to Judah. Today I have shown loyalty to the house of Saul, your father, to your brothers, to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hand of David. And you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman? He gets right up into Ishbosheth's face and pretty much tells him how it is. However, Abner is at fault because of Rizpah being part of Ishbosheth's inheritance as part of the throne. Now we could discuss the rules and regulations of what concubines' rights and no rights were during the law of Moses. I just didn't go that far into it this week to find that out. But anyway, he goes up and gets in front of this his king's face, and he tells him, "I have been loyal to your father, to his family, to his friends. I have not delivered you into David, and you charge me with the fault of this woman." He says, "This is it." He said, "May God do so to Abner and more so." In other words, God may condemn me if I don't do what I'm fixing to do. He says also, if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn unto him. At this point, we know that Abner knew that David had been anointed king over Israel. He probably had spent several years trying to fight against that, but he understood that the kingdom belonged to David. He said, "For if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him, that is to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba." He said, that is what David has been given by God to have, and so it belongs to him. And he could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. That shows us that Ishbosheth was a weak king, probably didn't want to be there to begin with, but here he was. And Abner, at that point, I think, seeing that the wars were going bad towards him, that Ishbosheth now is confronting him. He said, "This is it. I've got to do something for myself. My own power, my own influence is now beginning to become in jeopardy." And I think that's one of the reasons why at this point in time, Abner defected towards David. He didn't see any personal gain or profit from it. And I'm kind of thinking too, these men, when they defect and they're going to deliver unto David the whole kingdom, the armies, the whole 9 yards, they're thinking, okay, I'm the commander of these armies. If you want these armies to follow me, you need to keep me as a commander. So I'm going to continue to maintain a powerful position, but not under Ishbosheth's reign, but under David's reign. So I think there was not only realizing that God had given him the kingdom, but I think there may have been some personal gain that Abner was looking for. So he sends words to David, and he says, "Make a covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you." In other words, David, I'm yours. Just make a covenant with me. And David said, "Good, I will make a covenant with you," in verse 13. "But one thing I require of you, you shall not see my face unless you bring Michal, Saul's daughter, my first wife, when you come to see my face." In other words, David is saying, I'm laying claim now not only to the northern kingdoms, but I'm laying claim to the throne of Saul by the right of his marriage to his daughter. So now David is, again, looking at it from a political point of view. This is my claim or my key or my hold onto the throne, and that is Michal. So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife, whom I was betrothed myself for 100 foreskins of Philistines." And Ishbosheth sent and took her away from her husband, Paltiel, the son of Laish. He didn't argue. If Ishbosheth was a powerful king with a nation and knew that he could continue fighting against David, he would have said, "Are you crazy? I'm not going to submit to your demands." But he did, without question. He willingly gave up his sister back to David. And then we talked a little bit about, the weeping behind him. But 17 kind of fits, 17 and 18 kind of fits a little bit in between verses 13 and verses 16. Because he says, "Now Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, in times past, when you were seeking David to be king over you, now then do it." I think the times past that he was referring to was right after Saul had been killed by the Philistines. The armies had been decimated. They didn't have a king, didn't have an army, and I think they were fearful. They said, "We've got to unite under David because David has a history of being a strong leader and a strong warrior." And so Abner is now talking to the elders of the nations of Israel. He says, "You wanted this before, now let's do it. For the Lord has spoken to David, saying, by the hand of my servant I will save my people from Israel, from the hand of the Philistines and the hands of all their enemies. Not only did he talk about the nations of Israel, but he went down to the tribe of Judah and spoke this in the presence of the tribe of Benjamin, tribe of Benjamin. This was the tribe that Saul and his family was from. If he could get their commitment, then not only was the nation itself ready to unite under David, but the family of Saul himself was ready to go towards David too. And it says, not only did he do it there, but as he came down into Hebron, he spoke this before the Judeans. So there was no doubt where Abner stood, and there was no doubt about where the nation was headed. And Abner had done a great service to David at this point. Now, Abner and 20 men came to Hebron. David made a feast for them, and so when it was over with, they made the covenant, and he sent David away in peace to go back and make the final arrangements for this uniting of the nations. Now here's an interesting little scenario that kind of pops up here. Joab comes back just about the time Abner leaves. And when he finds out that Abner was there in their midst and that David had sent him away in peace, it seems to me like Joab just lost it all, because he gets into David's face and he just tells him like it is. He says, verse 24, he says, "What have you done?" What have you done, King of Judah? Look, Abner came to you. Why is it that you sent him away, and he has already gone? Surely you realize that Abner the son of Ner came to deceive you, and to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you're doing. Abner came to spy out the nation to find your weaknesses. He wanted to find out how he can conquer you. Didn't you realize that? In other words, Joab was telling David, you're not a very smart man. As a military leader, I could have seen this. Now, if David was a king that David should have been, he would have told Abner exactly where his place was. And he says, my decisions are final. You need to accept them, but he did not. He said, and then when Joab had gone from David's presence, down in verse 26, he sent word messengers to Abner, who was at the well of Sirah, which is probably about a mile outside of Hebron, and he comes back. Now, when he comes back, Abner had returned from Hebron. Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately. And there he stabbed him in the stomach, and he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. Now, I got to thinking about this. Was the revenge justified for the killing of his brother? So I got to thinking about the law of, I forget what they call it, but it was a law under the law of Moses that if a man was accidentally killed by someone, then there were cities that were established that man could flee to, so that his family could not avenge the blood of the one that had died. But it was an accidental death, and if that man came out of the city, then he could have his blood avenged. But when it came to something like this, just downright murder, even though it may have been for the cause that you killed my brother, that fell into a different category that I believe, and that was not so much the avenger of a relative's blood, but rather the murder of a man because he had killed someone else. That man should not have been murdered. He should have been taken before the council and let the elders decide, or the priest, or whoever it may be, decide the fate of that man, and then the execution be carried out. So Abner was not killed really for that reason. He was not for the reason of being avenged for the rightful vengeance of a family, but he was actually murdered in this particular case. And David understood this and knew this, but yet he didn't do anything about it. Now, when David did hear about it, he said, my kingdom and I are guiltless before the Lord. Forever the blood of Abner be upon the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab and all his family's house. And then he makes a petition to God that his house be cursed because of this act. let it rest on the head of Joab and all of his father's house, and let there never fail to be a person in the house of Joab, one who has a discharge, or is a leper, or one that leans on the staff, or falls by the sword, or one who lacks bread. In other words, for as long as this house lives, let them feel the punishment of what Joab had done this particular day. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel and Gideon in the battle. Now David said to Joab and to all the people that were with him, "It is time to mourn the death of this great man." He says, "Tear your clothes, gird yourself with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner." And King David followed the coffin, and they buried Abner in Hebron. And the king lifted his voice and wept over the grave of Abner and all the people. Now, David told Joab to do this. Now, can you imagine what was going through Joab's mind? I just killed this man for my own reasons, and now David wants me to mourn his death. What do you think that would kind of put a stick in the craw of old Joab? I can't believe David's making me do this, because he understands what Joab had done. What Abner had done. So I'm getting them mixed up again. Now, when I look at this, I see a couple of things here. Not only was Abner killed for Joab's brother, but I'm also thinking there's a possibility that Joab sees here's an opportunity to get rid of his adversary Abner, and he would not have to serve with him under David to manage these armies. He said, I can get rid of Abner, I can rise up to be the leader of all these great men. I won't have to share this power with anybody. So there's probably two things going through Joab's mind when he did this. And now he's facing, I think, humiliation from David to have to mourn the man that he just killed. So they buried Abner in Hebron. The king lifted up his voice and wept over the grave, and all the people wept. And the king sang a song of lamentation over Abner. He said, should Abner die as a fool dies? That is, someone that just didn't see it coming, just walked right into it. He says, your hands were not bound, nor your feet put into fetters. In other words, you were not taken prisoner in war. He said, as a man falls before the wicked men, so you fell. In other words, you were caught off guard, you were innocent, you were murdered, and you died a death that was not a death of a warrior. Then all the people wept over him. And they tried to persuade David to eat food. He refused to do so, and he would not taste anything until the sun goes down. And now all the people took note of that. Now, people watch the actions of other people. People watch us as we go about our lives. And the people were watching David when he was going through all of this. And then they took note of it. And it pleased them, since whatever the king did pleased all the people. They saw what David was doing and they took note of it. They watched him and they saw how genuine that it actually was. It was not a show to be put on, but it was genuine remorse for the death of Abner. Then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And then we see him saying, I am weak today, though anointed king. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too harsh for me. In other words, David really didn't know how to handle this situation. He understood these were powerful men. They had the armies behind them. And if he raised his hand against Joab, he was not sure how the army would react. So what does David do? David was a man after God's own heart. He said, the Lord shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. In other words, I don't know what to do, but I want to leave the judgment of this man in the hands of God. And that man will face God's judgment. And Joab does meet his end over in 1 Kings by the hand of Solomon. And then in verse 4, he says, and when Saul's son, that is Ishbosheth, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. They didn't know what was fixing to happen. They lost their great military leader. They knew that he was making this alliance with David, and now David he had died in David's presence, and they didn't know if David was fixing to just come up there and annihilate them or what was going to happen. But they do know one thing, that they could not rely upon Ishbosheth because he himself lost heart. Now, surprised I got through all that. So what's some of the lessons we can learn? Kind of tiny up there. One of the things I saw, or at least one of the things I kind of picked up on, was that a righteous parent who seeks after God's own heart may not always have righteous children, no matter how well they are trained. And they are brought up from day one, from the day of their birth to the day they die, to sit before God's presence, but they may not be righteous children. And that was the case of David. His children were not righteous. Also, choose your friends wisely and trust those that you trust may turn on you, even if it is to their advantage. So, choose your friends wisely. I think we see this, between David and Joab, between Abner and Ishbosheth. We see that people that you trust can turn on you if it's to their advantage. And know thy enemy. I've always heard that phrase. The deception of peace may be your undoing. And I can't remember why I put that down there. But I think Abner should have known Joab's true intent if he ever got in his presence. Don't let your guard down. Even though Abner may have came, Joab may have, as he said, met him at the gate, wanted to turn him off to the side, talk to him privately, thinking that we have peace now between our nations. Don't let your guard down, because those that you think you trust may be the ones that will be your undoing. Know who your enemy is, and I think that even today we need to understand who our enemy is, and that is Satan. And his deception of all the grandiose things in life can be our undoing. And then, like David, let people know your true heart and place your trust in God. Let people know who you are, because even as it says that they saw David and they took note of his actions, they see us and they take note of what we do. If we what's the word I'm looking for? If we forsake Christ in our daily lives in some way, they will take note of it, and they will ridicule God, and they will spurn the church, and they will find no way of salvation because of your actions. So, some of the things I had learned from this. A lot of talking I did. What do y'all think? Right?
Yeah, you read the book of Second Samuel many times, and the story of Joab and David and these others, but something that you get from it every time you read it, you get something new. But one of the things that it seems like Joab kind of turned, because he was fighting side by side with David as David was younger. And then as David got older, it seemed like David got to a point where he was trying to make peace with people more than make war. Joab was still in that attitude of, I'd rather kill you type of attitude, so that's the way he saw things. And you see that in this story. David would rather make peace with this situation than to create another scene, because he's trying to join two nations together to make one. And Joab really wasn't wanting that right now, and so you see that, and so you even see Joab going further as we get further into the books of what he does to even children of David.
Yeah.
So it gets a little bit more extreme on Joab's part before he finally runs into his brick wall, as you might say.
One thing I noticed from this, or at least it kind of jumped out at me, is that Abner was able to accomplish through diplomacy what Joab was not able to do through warfare, and that was to unite the nations. Joab, I think, was thinking, if I can conquer the Israelites and defeat their armies, and we just come right in and take over, I've united the nation under David. Abner took the route of peace and did it in this particular fashion, and I think that may have gotten under Joab's skin to some extent.
Well, the point where they brought up that Joab was growing stronger.
Yeah.
And Abner was more weak. I think in that situation, you might have even drawn the conclusion that maybe Joab was thinking, David's getting older, possibly I could be the next king. You know, there's a possibility he could have thought that.
People that have control over the military think that way, they really do. Anything else? Nothing else? Becky?
So, weren't they in desert and water was around them? Am I wrong on that? Or did you even look at that?
It depends what part of the country you're in. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the topology of this particular area, but, there was some desert areas, but there was some areas that had, you know, good agricultural grounds. And I think the area from the Jordan River, which was a plain area, was probably very fertile. Going up into the mountains, that kind of separated the two, well, I say the two nations, because Judah was kind of down below by the Dead Sea. But you had the mountain area, which probably had a lot of rain and a lot of agricultural. But there were some desert areas that they had to contend with too. Well, if that's it, that's all I've got. Janelle?
It makes you wonder if Joab knew the whole story about what happened between Abner and Asahel. Because Abner tried, back in chapter 2, to get Asahel to not pursue him. And he told him to get armor, and it was almost like Abner killed him in self-defense. But you wonder how much of that Joab was aware of, because he obviously killed Abner out of revenge. So.
We don't know how much he did know, but even if that was the story he was told, and it was the truth, I don't think Abner would have, I don't think Joab would have accepted it under any grounds, because of the fact that his brother had died. And sometimes that just, just kind of consumes you. Anything else? Well, I appreciate y'all's attention, and I hope